Hello, I'm Steve Parker at the University of Alabama in Huntsville's Office of Sponsored Programs. Today I'll be discussing subrecipient versus contractor determinations under the Uniform Guidance. Under the OMB Uniform Administrative Requirements, cost principles and audit requirements of federal awards, which went into effect on December 16, 2014, the term vendor was replaced with contractor. The terms vendor and contractor substantially have the same meaning and may be used interchangeably in other guidance. For consistency purposes, the non-federal entity receiving the funds is classified as a subrecipient or a contractor based on the nature of the relationship and the criteria in 2 CFR section 200.330. The reasons for this guidance is before entering into a relationship with another entity under the sponsored award in which the other entity will provide goods or services or substantive programmatic work to the prime recipient of funding, a determination must be made as to the nature and relationship of the prime recipient and the other entity, which in turn will determine the type of legal agreement required to document the relationship. This is a significant decision because it determines the allocation of responsibilities and influences the appropriate application of indirect rates. In the case of the subagreement, it is incumbent upon the prime recipient to ensure that recipients conduct their portion of the research projects in compliance with all applicable terms and conditions of awards and subawards, and that projected costs incurred by subrecipients are reasonable and allowable. Agreements with contractors, which used to be called vendors, for the purpose of services, however, typically don't bind vendors to the full set of sponsored terms and conditions and are subject to competitive bidding procurement practices to assure that funds paid to vendors do not exceed fair market value. Section 200.330, subrecipient contractor determination, as well as Section 200.22, contractor, and 200.92, subaward of the Uniform Guidance provide guidance on making subrecipient and contractor determinations. Most of the work on sponsored awards at UAH is conducted by faculty and staff on the premises of the university. However, it is sometimes determined that a portion of the research or project must be completed by an individual consultant or entity or an outside party of the university. In these cases, a legal agreement outlining the relationship between the parties and the university is required. It may take the form of either a sub-agreement, typically in the form of a subaward or subcontract, or an agreement with a contractor for purchase of services. It's important that the correct agreement determination is made early in the process of preparing the grant application, as overhead treatment and monitoring requirements for these types of agreements vary and will impact the grant budget and in some cases grant narrative. In addition, if specified in the subaward, the terms and conditions as sometime occurred, sponsored approval may be required prior to executing a subagreement. Sponsored pre-approval is rarely required to enter into a contractor-vendor agreement for purchases of services. Both forms of agreements should have a clear purpose and cost. The criteria used in determining the type of relationship are set in Section 200.330 of the Uniform Guidance. The determination must be made at the proposal stage, as we stated earlier, because the indirect cost, as you see in Section 200.68, Modified Total Direct Cost, the first $25,000 of each subaward is charged indirect cost. So you need to make the determination because if you have a large project, this could adversely affect the funds. A subaward means an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient for the subrecipient to carry out part of the federal award received by the pass-through entity. It does not include payments to a contractor or payments to an individual that is a beneficiary of the program. Subaward may be provided through any form of legal agreement, including an agreement that the pass-through entity considers a contract. So individual consultants and contractors, we would charge indirect on the full amount. On the subaward, if that determination is made, then you would only pay indirect on the first $25,000 of the subaward. A subrecipient relationship is appropriate when substantive programmatic work or an important or significant portion of the research program or project is being undertaken by the other entity. The research program or project is within the research objectives of the entity, or the entity participates in a creative way in designing or conducting the research. The entity retains some element of programmatic control and discretion over how the work is carried out. The entity commits a good faith effort to complete the design and conduct the research. The entity makes independent decisions regarding how to implement the requested activities. The principal investigator has been identified and is generally a co-investigator. There is the expectation that the entity will retain ownership rights of potentially patentable or copyrightable technology or products that it produces in the course of fulfilling the scope of work. Publications may be created and co-authored at the entity. The entity provides cost sharing in some cases or matching in which it is not reimbursed by UAH. Subagreements should have a detailed scope of work, a budget that specifies salary, fringe, supplies, other direct costs, as well as appropriate F&A costs consistent with the subrecipient's indirect rate. Terms and conditions from a prime award are typically imposed on the subrecipient to the same degree they are imposed on UAH as the prime recipient. A contractor, which used to be called vendor, that type of relationship, including that of an individual acting as a vendor for consultant services, is appropriate when the entity is providing specified services in support of the research program. The entity has not significantly participated in the design of the research itself. The entity is not directly responsible for the sponsor for the research or for determining results from the research. The entity markets its services to a range of customers, including those in non-academic fields. Little or no independent decision making is involved in the design and conduct of the research work being performed. The agreement only specifies the type of goods and services provided and the associated costs. The entity does not expect to have its employees or executives credited as co-authors on papers or anything like that emerged from the research. The expectation is that the work will not result in patentable or copyrightable technology or products that would be owned by the entity. In the case of an individual vendor or a consultant, the person has no employment relationship with UAH. As far as definitions, under the Uniform Guidance, an organization is considered a subrecipient of a federal award when it determines that who is eligible to receive what financial assistance, has its performance measured against whether the objectives of the federal program are met, has responsibility for programmatic decision making, has responsibility for adherence to applicable federal program compliance responsibilities. It uses federal funds to carry out a program of the organization as compared to providing goods and services for a program of the pass-through entity. Under the Uniform Guidance, as an organization is considered a contractor or vendor when it provides goods and services within normal business operations, provides similar goods and services to many different purchasers, operates in a competitive environment, provides goods and services that are ancillary to the operation of the federal program, and is not subject to compliance requirements of the federal program. Not all these characteristics will be present in every case, but under the Uniform Guidance, judgment should be used in each individual case in determining whether an entity is a subrecipient or a contractor. Uniform Guidance specifically states use of judgment in making a determination and determining whether an agreement between a pass-through entity and another non-federal entity casts the latter as a subrecipient or a contractor. The substance of the relationship is more important than the form of the agreement. All the characteristics listed above or in the Uniform Guidance may not be present in all cases. The pass-through entity must use judgment in clarifying each agreement as a subrecipient or a subaward or a procurement contract.